Within the Presbyterian Church, to talk about sexuality, sexual orientation has always been difficult. Mostly it's come up in terms of church leadership. Can a person who is a gay or lesbian, who's in a relationship, who's pretty open about that, can they serve in the church? A gentleman back in 1978 asked that question point blank because he felt called to the ministry. He set in motion a discussion process and a court process that issued a ruling that said, no, we see people that are actively in homosexual relationships as not being fit for ordained office. In around 1995, language was put in our Book of Order which said, you cannot be ordained for office, deacon, elder, or minister, unless you are faithful within the bounds of marriage, and marriage is defined as between a man and a woman, or living in chastity outside of marriage. It was an attempt to say clearly that gays and lesbians cannot be ordained to office without using any of those words.
There would always be some kind of motion that would be an attempt to eliminate the what we would call the sexuality clause in our Book of Order. And so every year we get that vote, and most of the years those kind of motions were always voted down. There have been a couple of our national meetings in which General Assembly voted in favor of eliminating the old language. But when it came to the vote of the presbyteries, and our denomination is made up of a whole bunch of presbyteries who always have to vote, and it's the presbyteries who vote that actually make it the law of our church. And so every time General Assembly had passed it, the presbyteries would say no. And so it would become mute, and then a new motion would have to come the next year. Our presbytery would be considered a conservative presbytery, has basically voted somewhat about, usually around between 60 and 65%. Always against motions in the past like this, and we were consistent again this time around about that same percentage marker.
Over a process starting back in October, November last year through May, presbyteries around the country voted on what was called Amendment 10A. That amendment would change the language currently in the Book of Order related to ordination standards. And finally, in mid-May, May 10th, a majority of presbyteries voted in favor of it. The new language talks about if you're going to be ordained, you should submit joyfully to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Functionally, that means that as a category of people, gay and lesbians in active relationships cannot be excluded from consideration for ordained office. In the same level, functionally, nothing has changed. We will still have people coming forward to nominating committees in their churches who they've been asked to consider being elders and deacons. And those nominating committees will themselves say, yes, you have gifts for this and we'd love to use you, or no, we don't see it as a good match.
For the PCUSA, it means that we have entered a whole new era for our church. By eliminating the language of what we call fidelity and chastity, which means that previously no one could be ordained if they were not faithful in singleness, meaning not participating in sexual relations. And so we're into now an era where that language has all been dropped out, and new language which says that you simply are supposed to examine the candidate to see if they're qualified to do the duty of being an elder or a deacon or a pastor. So we're really at that point where it kind of is like every presbytery and every church has the right now to decide how they want to take this.